like 4 young women that played volleyball, and their coach. It was very expensive. And stipulate Quinnipiac was playing games with the numbers because they want to have some guys there. This school was like, I don't know, 63%, 64% female. They want to come back. So it goes to court, and so they had a cheerleading squad that was of the competitive kind, and that could count. And so they took it to the judge. And as I told you, this judge said, no, it doesn't count. And you have to, now they have to go back and move, I forget, they're going to try to get, they're desperate to find something that they can attract as many women that want to play. And so there's no common sense, and it is a quota, and you're absolutely right, it seemed to me to be, I couldn't believe he ruled that way. What I think happened is I think that they're imagining that these women's groups, a lot of the feminist lawyers come to them, and they present it in very poignantly as a civil rights case. That you're here, this is like Brown versus the Board of Education. And separate but equal is not equal. And that's like a very powerful history in our law. And that's what, and those women's groups, they feel that way. But I'm standing there, I don't feel that way, because men and women are not like blacks and whites. Blacks and whites, the differences are superficial between the races. And that is not a basis for differential treatment. So the differences between men and women are not superficial. Particularly our preferences, propensities, interests, life priorities. There's just a vast reservoir of evidence that we are different. And you have to be careful about that because, as I said, there'll be exceptions. There will be the girl that wants to go to aviation high school. And I met them, and they were formidable, and they were fascinated with what they were doing. But I immediately think of what most young women would say about going there, and they would not be excited about it. But that's the way I see it. But that's the fallacy. So I think that why do they rule in that way is that they see themselves as sort of heroic in bringing about an equitable and fair and just and good society. And I see what they're doing is making us a less happy society and a less free society, and that people, what they're doing now is a lot of young women who are maybe not even that interested in sports are getting scholarships because they have to fill the position. And young men are, there are fewer and fewer sports opportunities. But now, as I said, beginning to happen math and science with greater confidence. Yes?
This is stepping away from Title IX a little bit, but you had mentioned in your speech the term hardwired, referring to presumably some kind of differences in why men and women pursue different things. I wonder if you can clarify that a little bit, whether it's more like intellectual capacity or strictly what leads people to different interests, and whether you think that separates you in a way from, I think, the former president of Harvard University got in trouble for making certain comments along those lines.
If you go back and look at his comments, he actually didn't say anything that terrible, because he wasn't even asserting that this was the case. He was saying this might be the case, it could be this, because he was asked, why are there so few women in the very high echelons of academic science? And one of the things he said, which is true, if you take an intelligence test, what you find is a kind of bell curve with at the tail, let's say the very extremes of the ability distribution. People, I don't mean just smart, the average IQ of men and women is the same. There's no difference, and men shouldn't get any, take any pride from this, because the average IQ is the same. But at the high end of the ability distribution, with people with freakishly high IQs, you have more males. And at the other end, people with freakishly low IQs, you have more males. So it balances out, and that's why. But if you look at, and there could be those people with those 160 IQs or whatever. Then there's that Asperger that we hear a lot about, now high functioning autistics. Well, met them. I had my field, the logicians and so forth. Some mathematicians. There are far more males who have that condition. So, that's a way in which it could be physiological. However, when I look at so there is that possibility that might explain that there may be an ability to, but I don't think it explains enough. I think it's what the second thing you said, which is interest. And I think that there's just, it even goes back to studies they've done with primates, vervet monkeys. They showed, male and female vervet monkeys, and they could play with a contraction, some kind of a little tool, or they could go for a vervet monkey doll. And the females tended to go for the doll, and the males went for the contraption. And even today, human beings, you ask a little boy or a girl to draw something, you try it with a 3 or 4-year-old, and she'll almost always draw a person, and he'll almost always draw a thing. And then, it goes on from there. But there are theories. There's Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge University who thinks he's trying to measure this, but there's in the early, that's hormonal, and that exposure to androgens. And we have a very interesting example of girls with something called adrenal hyperplasia, a congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And these are girls that are born with exposed to very high levels of male hormones in the gestation period, and they it's a genetic disorder. They're born with and they have the same play preferences as boys. They will go for the. If I had little girls and boys here, the girls would tend towards the dolls and the glittery ponies, and the boys towards the contraptions and the weapons. And so forth, and the girls with this condition, they have the same preferences as the boys. So again, I don't want to carry on about this too much because we don't fully understand it, and I do with the people that think that we're malleable and we can be changed. I mean, it's possible. There is a book you should read by John Colapinto called "As Nature Made Him," which is about a boy. There was an accident when he was a newborn, which we won't describe in detail. It was a botched circumcision, that's all I'll say. And the doctor just said, "Oh, well, that's all right. We'll just raise him as a girl. And we'll, later we'll have to give him some hormone treatments and things, but let's just kind of use little surgical things here and there." But right away, as soon as you can, the mother would say, "Put a dress on him and tell him he's a girl." So I think his name was David, or I forget what it is, but he became Brenda. And it was gender terrorism. If you read this book, what happened to him? He was a freak, and he knew, in his mind, he knew who he was. He knew what he was. And he would, amazing things. Anyway, it ended horribly. And the happiest day of his life was when he found out when he was 17 or something. His parents told him, and finally it made sense to him, and then he went back to become a guy. And whatever, it didn't end well. But anyway, that sort of thing, the idea that we're so very, in fact, actually my study about books like that, it made me much more committed to the cause of gay rights. Because like a gay person, I just think your gender identity I don't know, I want to say hardwired, but I think it runs so deep to who you are. And I think that there are people, not only is there variation, that people are gay and straight, but I think there are people that are super feminine, women. I mean, there's a range, but there are a lot of women who are very feminine, and men who are like macho, more, or just masculine, whatever those conventional meanings are. And that's who they are. If you force them to change, if you force, there's just like I told you about Aviation High School and all those boys, 80% boys. There's the Fashion High School in New York, which is almost all girls. And if you said, okay, we're going to switch, and you girls are going to go over to aviation, and the boys are going to go to Fashion Industry High, it would be like, I could just see it. We're not that. I just think that it runs very deep, and this is the last thing I'll say about this. I think the women's movement in the United States is the wholly owned subsidiary of one group of women who really believe in androgyny, and they don't sympathize with feminine women or women that want to stay home with kids or have traditional feminine, and they vilify, they demonize masculinity. If you read a lot of these feminist textbooks, it looks as though it's a pathology in need of a cure. They take your worst case sociopathic male, and in some, not all these textbooks, but in many of these women's studies textbooks, masculinity is presented as toxic, dangerous, something to recover from. Now that's their perspective. And that would be fine if there was balance in the women's movement, that they own it. So that's another one of my hobby courses that I want to not take back the women's movement. I don't want it just for me, but I want some variety. I want some balance.
Now, the New Jersey Interscholastic Athletic Association, which is the governing body for high school sports in New Jersey, came out with a study that high school athletes performed better in the classroom during their academic seasons. Now, as a former varsity college athlete, I lived through what I believe were the benefits of playing sport in college. I definitely think that, I haven't seen studies, but I think that it entices students to go to college, and ultimately I think it's a good thing for society. I also have a younger sister who was a varsity athlete in college. So through both of us, I saw this benefit. And so my question really is, isn't this a good thing that the government should be encouraging? Could it encourage more females to go to college? And
yes, I have read enough about it to find all sorts of benefits that come from being in sports. And I mean, I think back to something. I can't imagine anything that would make me want to play in a sport in college. But maybe I would have if I had the right inspiration. And it's good there are so many girls. But here's the thing. If that's the case, if it should be the role of the government to try to get people to do things that are fulfilling, and fine, why shouldn't it be? Then why not also try to get them into orchestras, or try to get the boys into drama clubs, try to get the boys to read? See, if it's about helping people flourish,